Hello artistic adventurers and welcome back to SketchQuest. We here at TYG have teamed up with some incredible artists to bring you this series of tips to help you start your adventure right. But before we can leave Tutorial Island, we need to brush up on a few skills. And don't worry if you're just starting out, because I'll be learning alongside you. And don't forget to use the hashtag SketchQuest so you can share your results with us. Let's see what today's quest is, shall we? Welcome in, adventurers. Today's quest giver is Lost Haven Art, a TTRPG artist, developer, and dungeon master extraordinaire. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming. What is our quest for today?
So our quest for today is we're going to be practicing some different rendering techniques for producing different materials. So we're going to be doing metal, stone, and something a bit more organic like leather or something like that. Cloth type material.
All right, okay. I'm actually showing off a lot of textures here that you did. We've got the metal and the fabric of the cape.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got
Yep.
quite a few here. So
I think I've learned a few more tricks since then as well. So right. The first thing I'm going to start with is I'm going to use a select, one of the lasso type tools. I'm using a circular one because I'm not going to be rendering anything specific. I'm just going to be showing you how to do the textures in like a ball type shape. So how I would normally start. Let's do a gold ball to start with. I'm going to use just like a solid round brush. So your basic Photoshop, Clip Studio, whatever. I'm using Krita for doing this. Brush, and I'm just going to fill our circle in with a. It's like somewhere between red and orange, but really dark, pretty saturated. You probably want to go a little bit more red. But it'll work. You'll get a metallic type effect, regardless of how you're doing it. So from this color, again, I'm just using the solid round brush. I'm going to adjust my color a little bit more towards the orange side, kind of orangey yellow now, and lighten the color. I'm going to start filling that in. Yeah, so this initial approach is kind of how you would cell shade. So if I'm doing like a anime, manga, comic style, I'd be doing this without any gradients, any blurring the edges or anything like that. And we're just going to move the colour up a little bit more yellow, and we're going to desaturate a little bit. So we're moving more towards the white side of things. I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller. And we're going to drop one. And then I'm going to do one more highlight. Just off-white, more to the yellow side of stuff. I'm going to drop it in this top corner here. I don't know, does Clip Studio have blending brushes?
Yep.
Cool, so I'm just going to get like a soft blending brush. And I'm going to start now blurring the edges here. It's alright if you kind of push the colours into each other. Kind of smooth it out, push the colours together. So you end up with something a bit like that. You could probably make the brush a little bit bigger if you wanted to. So there's a few places where we can go. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see a little bit better. So with metallics, you get a lot of reflection. So if you imagine this ball is on a table or something like that, there's going to be a light coming from the top left. Some of that light is going to bounce back against the bottom right. I'm going to use a airbrush style brush for this. I'm going to go back to not our lightest tone, but the second lightest one, so the more yellow looking. And I'm just going to add a little bit in around this bottom right edge of the ball. Reflective materials like metal usually have some pretty harsh highlights. So where our highest highlight is, that colour will be kind of washed out now that we've blended it. So I'm going to get the hard brush again. This time I'm going with one with a bit of a point to it. I'm actually going to move it a little bit more to this side, just off where I put that initial highlight. Adding in a few lines. I get the blending brush again. Just kind of dab it just to kind of soften the bottom half transitions into the rest of the material. There's a few things we can do from here. We can use like your overlay, multiply. The word is completely blanked at the minute, but I'm going to use a overlay layer. Do a new layer, set it to overlay. I've still got the ball selected. We can adjust the color of this ball that we've done. So if you wanted something a little bit more yellow gold,
tonal correction.
You can adjust the color that you got selected on overlay layer. Or kind of painting that on there, it'll give you a more rich yellow gold. If we wanted to the gold that I've already done is already a bit desaturated. We could use the screen mode. It'll give us a bit more yellow but keep the desaturation level. That's a bit bright. Although it's now looking like a fireball, so something's worked. Happy accidents and all that. But you can use your blend mode, that's the word that I'm looking for, to adjust a few things. I like to use them for adding shadows in. So I'll use a multiply layer. I'll pick a blue or a purple. And you can just lightly paint it in. Again, where your shadows are going to be, probably towards the bottom of the ball. Again, we've got this slight highlight coming in here, so the bottom where it would be sitting directly on top of the surface. And so, like, your metals are quite smooth. To do it a bit more painterly, there's all sorts of brushes you could use. You'd use something with a little bit of texture for applying your initial colours, and probably wouldn't blend them quite as smoothly as I did with that one. Again, circle. They don't all need to be the same size. That's all good. This one is stone. So, I don't like to use pure grey or pure whites and pure blacks when I'm doing painting. Sometimes I'll use them, but very, very sparingly. So for doing like a stone, I'd usually pick like a kind of bluish grey, maybe a greeny grey if I'm doing something maybe a bit more foresty or a bit more mossy. And again, I'm just going to fill the ball in with this grey. Kind of mid grey, kind of bluey grey. And again, similar process. However, I'm going to use a slightly more textured brush, and I'll show you how this brush looks off to the side. So it's kind of chisel shaped. It's got some ragged edges. It's got some pressure sensitivity. And so it gives you a kind of almost chalky type feel. So if you can find like it is a natural, like traditional media type brush. It is a charcoal brush that I'm using. And it gives you just a little bit of like jagged texture. When I zoom in here, you'll be able to see it a bit better. I'm going to undo all that. Reselect our circle. And again, similar to when we were doing the metallics, I'm going to go slightly lighter blue, slightly more towards white. And I'm going to start painting in where that highlight would be coming in from. The reason that I'm using a brush that has pressure sensitivity is it actually makes for smoother blending when you're painting over the top of stuff. So I've only adjusted the colour once, but because the pen has some pressure sensitivity and it's a rougher, more uneven surface, I'm able to get quite a lot of colour variation by adjusting how much pressure that I'm putting on the pen. And this highlight is a bit more of a neutral grey instead of the blue. But this time we're going to paint in some shadows. So I'm going to start adjusting the blue a little bit more towards the purple side. Not quite purple, somewhere in between purple and blue. And adjust the hue so it's a little bit darker. And again, if we're still taking the same approach here, the light is coming from the top left. Our shadow is going to be in the bottom right. I'm still using the same textured brush. Adjusting the pen pressure just to get darker shadows in here. Colours will overlap a little bit. That's fine, it gives you a little bit more texture to play around with. And you're going to end up with something kind of like that. It kind of looks a bit boring for rock. So rocks tend to have a lot of cracks and a lot more texture to them. Like I was saying earlier, they can sometimes have moss and stuff that grows over the top of them. So we're gonna pretty this rock up a little bit. So there's a number of ways you can do this. I have some cheap brushes in here, which are already kind of like cracks. Again, I'm going to make a new layer, set it to multiply. With a brush like this, it can really speed up the process, where you can add in cracks and stuff quite easily. But if you didn't have a brush like this, which I'm assuming most people won't.
Nope. I do not.
We go back to our round brush, but the one that's pressure sensitive. We'll take our mid-tone, have our multiply layer, and then you can slightly start drawing lines. You want to kind of crisscross some of them. Sometimes you'll get little lines that overlap, and you can fill those in to make the cracks a little bit thicker. Again, if it's got pressure sensitivity, the more you lean on it, the thicker your lines are going to be. And you can just make this as cracks as you want it to be. Add in some big chips by doing some thicker lines, some smaller cracks that kind of crumble together by doing smaller spaces in between. You can add in some more texture by just putting odd squiggly lines like I'm doing here. Various places, various directions. And again, I'm going to do another layer and set it to green. I'm not going to come off the mid-tone grey that I've got. Zoom in a little bit more so you can see what I'm doing here. So because the multiply layer, the shadows and stuff are all underneath this, using the same grey with a screen layer gives me a different colour up here on the highlight points than down here in the shadows. So it means you can add highlights to things like cracks and stuff like that. Always make sure that your highlights are are facing the direction that your light source is coming from. But it means the highlights up here on these cracks that are a little bit closer to your light source are going to be lighter than the ones that we've got down in the shadows here. Another thing that you can do to make stone a little bit more interesting, this time I'm adding a new layer and I'm adding a normal layer. Taking the same brush that I used to paint the stone texture in the first place. Make sure the circle's still selected. I'm going to pick like a mossy green type of colour. And start lightly painting over the top. Get a little bit of colour transition. Go a little bit heavier. Building up layers. We'll go up pure green. Then I can deselect this rock. Again, if we're using this round brush, but it has pressure sensitivity, so you get different thicknesses. You can start with a few little flicks. Start adding some grass onto the top. You can add highlights to your green. Grass will end up being a lot of different colours depending on how the light's hitting it. Lots of other things, so we can maybe go a little bit darker towards this side. We're just adding a little bit more variation, texture and stuff to it, so you end up with like this kind of really mossy looking stone with some grass growing on it. Again, I've collected a lot of different brushes over the years. I've got some cheap brushes like this that let me just paint tufts of grass on top of stuff. But for someone beginning, I wouldn't get too bogged down on like using fancy brushes and stuff like that. The round brush that you get is standard with every art package. Can do a lot of things. The airbrush can be used to add subtle shadows and stuff like that in places. And most art packages tend to come with a few brushes that have some interesting textures on them already, so learning how to use the tools that are there from the get-go will then, when you do start playing it and experimenting with brush packs that you've maybe downloaded or whatever, you've got a better idea how they work because you know how all the basic brushes work. So, last texture circle that we're going to be doing. We're going to take the select tool, get ourselves another circle, and say that's going to do the leather. I do a lot of TTRPG stuff, do a lot of fantasy stuff. You get, guys with leather armor, sword scabbards, belts, all that. Leather is a texture that I do a lot. And again, if we're doing it on a round surface like this, the approach doesn't really change too much. I'll take you've already put a brown in there. I'll take a slightly dark brown. With leather, especially the type of leather I'm going to show you how to do, which is your kind of worn, it's been through a few adventures sort of look. It loses some of the shine, it's not oiled and polished. And again, we're just going to use a texture brush. Same one that I used for doing the rock. But I'm going to desaturate the brown, so we're going to move it more towards grey. And keeping the light source the same, building up highlights the same way. This is where something like me being able to show how I select colours would be useful. So I'm going to stretch this out. So I've got my colour wheel set up to look like this. When I'm saying, if I quickly grab the original colour that I used, which is this dark brown. When I'm saying go a little bit lighter and desaturate, I'm kind of moving the selector in like a backwards L shape. So I'm moving it down a little bit and then towards the grey. That's how you desaturate. If you're wanting stuff to be a bit more bright and vibrant, then you would go the other way where you do the L shape and go towards the more intense colour. Again, if I'm going darker, then it'd be up into the desaturated side. So there's a lot of colour theory in this, where you might adjust the colour as well, so that you're moving a little bit further away from orange or blue or purple or whatever colour that you're using. So to the shadows, desaturating, going darker, And I go a little bit redder. Again, light direction, top left. This bottom right hand side of the orb gets to be in shadow. The upside of, other than the metallic, which is always going to be high gloss and smooth, might be a little bit jagged and rough if it's something a bit more worn, like armor or something like that. Your things like rock and leather have a little bit more leeway in terms of how you're texturing them, because they're natural materials that get cracks and dents and scratches and things like that. That means if you're using, because I've got lots of different brushes here that I can use for adding texture. This one's a little bit closer to some of the brushes that are on clip. But the key thing is, for doing things like stone and leather, what you're looking for is a brush that has some speckle, some texture already to it. It'll just give your material a little bit more of a natural feel. But again, we can go back to Old Faithfuls for doing certain things as well. So I've take the round brush, go a little bit lighter than our highlight here, and we can start lightly adding in scratches onto the surface. Can go a little bit darker as well. The thing to keep in mind is if you're rendering materials like this, you're usually going to be doing them on a character or an item or in an environment. And so it's going to be part of a bigger composition. And so, like, your goal is, like, if they're part of a bigger composition, so I've zoomed right out, you're going to be seeing these materials a little bit closer to how they appear here as part of a bigger picture. And so the goal as an artist is to rate the impression of the material, not necessarily get it perfect. As long as you and whoever else is viewing your artwork looks at it and goes, yep, they're wearing leather armor, that is a big giant stone, that is a shiny gold coin, you've done the job. And even zoomed out, you can see a few of these little highlighted scratches and things like that. So they make an impression without having to get too bogged down the detail. There's a few others we can do with leather, again, that are using basic brushes. So I'm going to not desaturate, go a little bit lighter, go a little bit more yellow, as if it's a slightly different material. There's ways to make this easier. You can set up brushes that will repeat a pattern for you. I don't actually have one. And we can do things like add in stitching. Which is just a pattern of repeated lines. we can add another stitch in to here. Do things like use our blend modes. So we want to make this leather look like it being stitched together from different materials. You can go to multiply, you can go to overlay, there's a few different ways you can do this. I'm going to pick maybe a more purpley colour, like greyish purple. And we can shade over some of these parts. We'll go for a more yellow colour. And a screen. So you can apply a little bit more colour. Keep all the rendering that you've done underneath. And mix and match your materials. You can even do like nasty human flesh looking. Taking like a kind of pink colour. Flesh tone overlay. Probably want to add a little bit of green to that. So if you're doing like Warhammer 40k fan art or something like that. You can do a lot of things with basic brushes, with one or two brushes that have textures, and over time you'll probably grow your own library of brushes. Like, I've got so many brushes on Twitter, and I probably don't use about 75% of them because I found the ones that work for me. Mm-hmm. Different software will have different brushes available, as we've found out. Mm-hmm. Some software have lots and lots of options for download packs and stuff like Photoshop. There are tons of brush options. Clip Studio, there's a decent amount. If you're using Procreate on an iPad, you get a lot of choices. It doesn't actually have a lot of like custom brush support. A lot of the brushes that I'm using are ones that come with it. So depending who's developed the software as well, can have an impact like on what they feel is an essential tool. But I think the basics of this art quest is you're creating an impression of the material. And the quest for this week would be to make yourself a few circles like this. Maybe look at some reference pictures of things like stone, wood, fabric, leather, metals, and try and replicate not the object itself, but how the material looks using the brushes that you have available and whatever art software that you're using, and just get a feel for how you can imitate those different, because they're useful for so many things, from character creation to environment design to prop design, costumes, monsters, environments, all that sort of stuff. Like, knowing how to render materials is an invaluable skill as an artist, especially if you're doing fantasy art.
Yeah. So go on out there, adventurers, and spread your wings and try out all the different materials and fabrics. Remember to use the hashtag SketchQuest so we can see all of what you come up with. Thank you very much for sharing with us today, Andy. Very much appreciate you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me.
You can find Lost Haven on all the social medias. Be sure to drop a follow. There'll be some links in the description below. We'll be back tomorrow with another sketch quest. Until then, we'll see you all later, tears. Bye!
Bye!